Hello everyone, this is the Prof player and I am Joe. I've been the translator of Pathfinder 2nd edition and 1st edition for the last 13 years. I was very young when I started. Today I want to take an in-depth look of Pathfinder 2nd edition adventure design, and I want to do it with a case study. We will take a close examination of Secrets of the Unlit Star, which is the introductory adventure contained inside the Secrets of the Unlit Star beginner box, the new beginner box of Pathfinder 2nd edition for the remastered version. This is a box that contains a lot of stuff, not only this adventure. In fact, the adventure itself is numerically speaking, a small part of it. You have full maps, you have the poems, you have character sheets, you have handouts, you have a lot of things, including the whole rules of the game, simplified for a beginner box. But what I want to do here is just to focus on the adventure, because I want to talk to you guys about adventure design and how Pathfinder 2nd edition addresses that. Now, you may be wondering, but why did you choose the introductory adventure to talk about Pathfinder 2nd edition adventure design? Well, the reason why I did that is that I believe that an introductory adventure is the first step, the gateway to Pathfinder for many players. And I believe that what the adventure teaches this new player about the game is the way they will think about the game, the way they will understand the game. So the introductory adventure of a game is very important in establishing its adventure design philosophy. Now I know that Paizo is very well known for its adventure path, and trust me, I know, because I played really a lot of them, but despite this, I think that it's still very worth to take a look at this introductory adventure and see what it teaches us, what it tells us about the focus of a Pathfinder game, of the way in which Pathfinder players get the game from this beginner box. That will be the first step, as I said, into the Pathfinder world. Now, this will be a very technical review because it's what I usually do on this channel. This is a place where I talk all about RPGs, and I especially do it in things that can be boring, can be considered that, but are very in-depth, I believe, because I want to take my time, because I really like to take my time and talk about things such as design philosophy, the philosophy of RPGs, and so on. I have a PhD in history of philosophy, so that it's my field, and I just thought it interesting to combine two of my greatest passion in one channel. On this channel, I also give you a lot of reviews about games, adventures, supplements, modules, expansions for all RPGs I know and like, including Pathfinder. Of course, most of the channel is in Italian, but you can always put the subtitles on if you really care about what I want to say. But with that said, let's jump straight into the analysis. Okay, let's begin our in-depth analysis of the adventure from the start, which I think is a strong one. The characters are put right into the action, with the floor collapsing under their feet and a simple combat ready to put them to test. I think beginning in medias res is always a good idea, and for a game that has combat as its strongest pillar, as Pathfinder is, this is very appropriate and helps in establishing the focus of the game experience. A slower start, I think, would have been detrimental to the overall quality of the adventure, so nicely done. The whole narrative tool keeping the adventure together is that the characters are stuck in an old temple below the earth and are unable to get back on the surface. They quickly realize that the only way to go back up to civilization is to restore a lift. But in order to do so, they will need to use a magic item, the Unlit Star, that unfortunately has been broken to pieces, and now the characters need to find these pieces by exploring the whole complex. Simple, but it works very well, I believe. When you have an introductory adventure such as this one, you don't need anything more complex than that. And quite frankly, many adventure paths that I played tried to do something more original, but ended up making it just more confusing. So I think straightforward adventure drives such as this one should be welcome regardless of the nature of the adventure. The rooms on the first level of the temple are simple and full of straightforward encounters designed to teach the various parts of the game, especially combat. If you're playing with a group of experienced players, even if they are new to Pathfinder, you may want to remove this didactical approach and make the encounters more beefy and less direct. Sometimes I feel that directedness is a bit too much throughout the whole adventure. You have a total of 15 possible combat encounters in the whole dungeon, and every single one of them is presented in the exact same way. The fight is triggered by simply entering the room where the creatures are, with no alternative approach whatsoever. You enter the room, the creatures attack. I have compiled a full list of encounters that followed this script, just to make sure that there were no exceptions. The giant centipedes in the crashed lift, the umbral gnome scouts in the shadowed balcony, the magnetic skinks in the south hallway, the skeleton guards in the temple, the ferrous butterflies in the ruined rooms, the ghouls in the crypt, the shadow bat fight at the end of the first floor, giant flies in the dormitories, the water scamps in the washroom, the giant spiders in the meeting room, the string slimes in the refectory, the twigjacks in the garden, although I may say there is some stealth happening here, undeads in the priest's quarters, the shadow gargoyle in the vault, and the final boss fight with Lucan. There's not even one combat encounters where the players have a way to tackle it in a different way. The creatures are immediately hostile and they attack. I understand why this was done, to make their life easier on the GM and to set an expectation for the players. But doing this so extensively comes off to me as a little lazy. I expected at least 2 or 3 encounters to appear in a different way, even if only to allow for more player agency and to teach the players that this system allows for a variety of ways to deal with enemies or encounters in general. Playing an OSR game will teach you this. When you play old school essentials, Dragonbane, Shadowdark, Cairn, Into the Odd, or any good OSR games really, fighting the monsters is the last resort, because that will drain your resource. That is a risk. Maybe you can bargain with the monsters, or maybe they are otherwise occupied and you can sneak up on them, or even avoid them entirely by using stealth. Maybe you can use some feature of the environment to change the way the combat starts, and sometimes you can pit 2 factions against one another. In Secrets of the Unlit Star, you don't have this, and I get it. You don't have this in Pathfinder adventure design in general, because Pathfinder is not an OSR game. But I think that a game such as Pathfinder is, especially when it comes to dungeon crawling, may benefit a lot from this kind of open approach to combat encounters and the way they are triggered. Some recent adventure paths tried this and I think they did very well. Again, I get why they didn't want to complicate things in a beginner adventure, but I believe that in doing this, there's the risk of delivering the wrong message. That Pathfinder is a game where you open doors and fight monsters, which is true, but only part of the truth. There are so many different things you can do with a system as deep as Pathfinder is, and teaching new players that this is all the game has to offer is straight up bad. This is bad for absolute beginner, but is double as bad for players using the adventure to see if Pathfinder is better than D&D for their group. So much potential left unexpressed is a shame. I would have liked to see a bit more courage here, because I think that even beginner players can handle finding creative ways and new ways to deal with encounters, that it's not just they attack us on sight, we don't have any other option than to fight them to the death. I know, sometimes for a player that loves combat, this is actually the only way to save them from a whole evening spent role-playing, but there are middle grounds here, I think. Maybe you put 5 encounters like this in an adventure just to ensure that some combat is unavoidable, but the rest, please, let the players be the active side and not always the passive side, having to react to the monsters attacking them. I think the players can be trusted to do that. Okay, rant's over. Another thing I want to talk about is the way this adventure handles the relationship between players and characters. Pathfinder generally presents you with character-facing hazards in exploration, and mostly player-facing hazards or dangers decision-making in combat. By that I mean that when you are exploring, it's not a matter of what you, the player, are noticing or focusing on, but what your character is doing. Want an example? The falling shelves trap in the storage room. Here, right upon entering the room, the players are immediately asked a perception check to see if they notice that the shelves are in danger of toppling over. This is the definition of mechanics first. It doesn't matter if you, the player, wanted your character to do something or to take a look at the shelves. First you roll, and only if you succeed you notice something. The players are not even given the opportunity to investigate the dangers. This leads to a pauperization, I would say, of player agency and discourages creative thinking and active problem solving. Both strong elements of why I believe dungeon crawls are fun and were fun in early D&D and recent old-school games. I would have let the players decide if their characters wanted to inspect the shelves, and give them an automatic success in locating the traps as a reward for their creative thinking. Then, if no one actually spots the danger, maybe then you can give them a perception check to locate the danger before it triggers. Again, maybe new players won't even think about checking a room for traps, but they will never learn if you never teach them. And what better place to do it than an introductory adventure in a beginner box? This kind of design, I think, is a missed opportunity, because players are not allowed to use their characters in a creative way to solve problems and anticipate danger. They just roll the dice and see if their characters notice something. This encourages them to be in a passive stance, just like the combats triggered by simply entering the room. And I believe that this could have been done way better. In addition to traps and monsters, there are two simple puzzles in the dungeon, and those address the players directly, instead of their characters. They both allow to use a character's skill to deduce an important clue, and the puzzle in the music room can be bypassed to avoid frustration by taking 10 minutes and forcing the solution. One thing I found unconvincing in this kind of design is that there is no consequence for spending more or less time solving the puzzle, so it does not really reward the players for solving it themselves, and it does not carry any complication for forcing the solution. I think some consequence here, such as a small bonus treasure if the players solved the problem on their own, may have made the puzzles more interesting and consequential. For this reason, I found that the puzzle in the library is better because it actually forces the players to do some kind of problem solving. One might say, however, that this kind of player-facing design, as opposed to character-facing design of the rest of the dungeon, may end up creating some confusion in the players when it comes to determine the relationship between the players and the character's skills. The encounters are designed to alight the rules of the game, and now I'm talking about the combat encounters, especially when it comes to combat tactics. The gold encounter in the crypt, for example, teaches the players about flanking by having monsters that actually use that strategy. The Shadow Twigjacks use stealth and initiative rules to their advantage, while the undead fight in the Head Priest's quarters introduced the concept of using different stat blocks in a single encounter, with various enemies doing different things and playing different roles. You also have some encounters when the adventure teaches you how to deal with creatures that are flying, for example. I appreciate the occasional rejection of illusionism in the design of certain areas. For example, upon completing the first floor, the characters will certainly need to heal. However, they might have missed the rooms where the healing items were placed. Instead of suggesting to move those healing items, to a place where the characters may find such objects, the adventure suggests that GM directly tell the players that healing supplies may be hidden somewhere in the floor. It is still a cue, but for a new player, that is not that bad actually. I would say avoid it if your players are experienced, as that may feel too much as holding their hands, and even make you look like you are disregarding their choice not to explore all the rooms in the complex for the sake of going faster. Maybe that's why they did so. Again, using time as a resource and making it matter would have solved this issue. On that note, there is a lot of hand-holding throughout the whole adventure. For example, if the players don't think about reattaching the star shards to the Unlit Star, the text tells the GM to suggest it in the form of a feeling conveyed to a character by the shards themselves. If you are playing with more experienced players, you probably won't have to worry about this though, because they'll figure out themselves and spare you all the need for a GM intervention. Just give them their time and resort to the suggestion when strictly necessary. You will find another example of this in the refectory, where there is a shard that might be missed. In that case, the adventurers straight up tell you that the shard itself wants to be found and grows bright. This could have been handled better, I believe. If finding the shard is mandatory and failing is not interesting, why not just have the Unlit Star magnetically attract the shards once you reach the appropriate room? If searching for that kind of things is not interesting, it does not involve any failure, why don't just make it automated instead of this kind of illusion? I like how the freedom to explore given to the players increases in the second level, however. The first floor was more guided and more or less had an established path. The second level leaves more room to explore the rooms in any order the players prefer, thus giving them more agency, I believe. But to make it really matter, the adventure should present the players with plenty of information or clues on what they might find in the rooms before entering them, so that the order of exploration is a tactically meaningful and informed decision. There is no time constraints even in level 2, and this negatively impacts many game mechanics. For example, the footlocker in area B2B requires 2 successes to pick this lock. But what happens if the check fails? The characters can just try again without any consequence. That does not respect the player-forward design included in the Game Master's Guide, and to me, this is straight up bad design. Just tell the players that they open all the lockers with a bit of work. There is no point in making them roll if a failure has no consequence and they can simply try again. And I know what you will say that that check is there to make the rogue feel useful, to make that skill that he or she or they have count, but I still believe that's not enough. I still think that that doesn't really count, that doesn't really make them count. Another thing that this adventure does that I don't like is the occasional rewards for players for searching the rooms more thoroughly. Take the Scrolls of Force Barrage in area B2D as an example. It is found only with a DC 16 perception check while searching the room, but the adventure doesn't say whether the players must declare that their characters search the room, or is it up to the GM to call for such a check. Technically, these kind of checks should be activated by the players, as there is no passive perception in Pathfinder, and to search is a specific exploration action or activity. You have something similar in the dormitories as well, in the ruined dormitories. But since we're talking about exploration, let's also address another big elephant in the dungeon. Pathfinder 2nd edition has an exploration mode with specific exploration actions to be taken while exploring. This beginner box doesn't teach it to the players. Worse, it gives them the impression that the dungeon exploration in Pathfinder is freeform, much like it is in D&D. I believe that the exploration procedures are a fun and interesting part of Pathfinder, and disregarding them for the sake of simplicity is a bizarre move, I think, because it makes Pathfinder look similar to its direct rival without even trying to believe in its strength and the strength of its design choices. The washroom is an interesting room, however. It presents a mandatory fight, okay, but allows the monsters to flee and hide, ready to attack again if they are found. This makes things a little more dynamic than a straight-up fight to death, and I really appreciate it. There's even a chance to return the water elemental scamps to their original plane by repairing the basins and the tubs magic. I really liked the design of this room and the effort to go beyond a simple combat by giving players what might very well be or end up being a moral choice about what to do with their foes. Oh, and failing a check while repairing the water's magic deals damage, so there is a consequence. In the refectory, after a fight, the characters meet the ghost of one of the temple's dead priests. This is a moment very much needed, I believe, to break the dungeon crawling sequence of opening doors and fighting everything moving inside them. This is not considered as an encounter, however, and I think it's a shame that this was not handled as a social encounter. Pathfinder surely has a system to do it, and it is integral to the experience, I believe. I know, I get why they didn't implement it, and I reckon that it was mostly for simplicity's sake, but I think that this was another point when a bit more courage would have been needed to stand out and show how Pathfinder does have mechanics for social interaction. It doesn't just leave you to wing it with free play and a few social skills like D&D does. The free back and forth with the ghost is not bad. It has a single skill check needed, with no consequences for failure, and proves a useful pause from incessant fighting. But to me, this is another lost opportunity to highlight Pathfinder's strong points. To someone who is new to RPG in general, this won't probably matter, but for the many people who have played D&D before and are playing this adventure to try Pathfinder out, I believe that showing how Pathfinder can deal with social encounters in an interesting way was a huge opportunity. I would have taken it. And this leads me to talk to you and to make a brief excursus and to say that what I get from this beginner box is that this is a very good this is a very good adventure for new players, for absolute new players. But there are a lot of people who are already playing RPGs, other RPGs, and are trying Pathfinder. Nowadays, Pathfinder is not the people's first game they play, most likely. They likely start with D&D and then look around. And I believe that a Pathfinder beginner box should also address those kinds of players, and should also address another important thing. This should also address the case, which is the most common case in my imagination, that the GM is experienced while the players are not. And that is very important, because such an adventure that teaches you the mechanics of the game as you go on with the encounters, it's not very easy to do for even an inexperienced GM, and is very useful. But I believe that there would have been some value in not assuming that the GM was a novice too. You should have to contemplate it, but to also leave room for experienced GM to give them advice on how they can make the thing a bit more appealing for players who have already played the game. So to give them some tools, some suggestions. In its actual state, the adventure is very good for people who have never played an RPG before, but can be redundant and even sometimes boring for players who are actually experienced about dungeon crawls. They know what they are, and GMs that are looking for advice to make this a little more appealing for their players are left alone. Of course, they can implement failing forward design, they can re-devise the encounters and have them not to trigger just when the characters enter a room, but the adventure doesn't really help you, doesn't really guide you. And I believe even a single box saying, hey, this adventure was developed with newbie GMs in mind. But if you are experienced, you may want to change the way in which the encounters trigger. Maybe make the dungeon more dynamic, make the enemies move, maybe make the enemies ambush the players, maybe make the enemies be doing something while the players enter a room. This was an important thing and another missed opportunity, I think, because most of the times, I believe, the GMs who will run this game will not be totally novice to RPGs in general. Another thing I have to say about the social scene in the refectory, and we are circling back to it, is that the question and answer format has grown old. This is a criticism I have even concerning to Pathfinder adventure design in general, even with adventure paths. This kind of design with questions, most likely questions, and most likely answers dates back to the first adventure paths, but we can do much better today, I believe. Since those answers are not meant to be read aloud, as they are anyway, but rather used as a reference for the game master, I think that a clearer bullet points structure with all the relevant information would have been way better. It would have freed up some space for more content and would also have left all the room the GM needs to add a few tips on how to roleplay this specific ghost, its language, and everything else. Any tip the developers may have about this kind of specific encounters. I feel like the question-answer format is outdated as of now, and I would like Paizo to move forward and present information in a more efficient and GM-friendly way, because bullet points are way easier to reference at the table. The same can be said about the chat with a friendly Leshy in the garden. There is a lot of information to process here, most of them crucial to the adventure. If you are a prospective GM seeing this video I mean, take my advice and don't info dump the players. The adventure doesn't help you in doing that, and so you should improvise. Make the conversation feel alive and give the basic information in small chunks so that they may be easier to process for the players. Pay particular attention to the foreshadowing of the final encounter, which gives players a way to know what exactly they're going to face and prepare accordingly. This is very important in a game such as Pathfinder, where players may decide to spare some resources for the final boss, for example, if they get the sense that a specific ability might come in handy during that last confrontation. But let's move forward and let's go to the garden. I will move you to the second level here, and here I really dig Golki, the friendly Leshy the characters can interact and trade with. It's some sort of cozy and whimsical relief in an otherwise quite dark dungeon crawl. This is an elegant way of introducing the players to the trading aspect of Pathfinder, which is more important than you might think and a part of the game's experience, contrary to some modern games, such as Daggerheart, for example, that abstract it away. This was clever design, and I think this part needs to be praised. To balance that, I think that the vault puzzle at the end of level 2 is poorly designed, for the same reasons we have already seen in other puzzles. It asks the players for a lot of skilled rolls, but the only consequence in case of failure is that you just lose more time, but losing time does not in itself have any significance whatsoever, so basically failing results in just trying it again and no changes in the story. This, again, contradicts a failed forward design that Pathfinder theoretically embraces, and I think benefits any kind of TTRPG adventure. The fight with the Shadow Gargoyle that marks the end of level 2 is another huge missed opportunity, I think, to design something different from a straight-up inevitable fight in a static area. Imagine fighting the gargoyle on the lift while the lift is moving. Instead, the adventure explicitly tells you that the gargoyle attacks before the characters use the lift. This is another opportunity where you could have a box for experienced GMs and say, if you feel comfortable with that, then just have a more cinematic combat where the lift is moving. While if you are a novice, then just don't do that, use the static area encounter. I do like, however, how the character can use the Unlit Star to interact with this encounter in an interesting way. The final boss fight is quite good, I believe. It is yet another scripted combat with no chance to tackle it otherwise, but at least it allows the characters to interact with the environment to make the fight easier. There's also this concept of shadow walls ready to grab the characters that makes the battlefield feel alive and interesting. This also serves as an introduction to complex hazards for players and game masters alike, and really shows what Pathfinder can do to make combat more enticing and fresh. There are several ways to overcome this hazard, and this will get the players thinking, another thing I like. At the end of the adventure, the Unlit Star is finally made whole again. This is a nice way of using a MacGuffin to give cohesion to the exploration, and I quite frankly like it. When all is said and done, I really dig the idea that Pathfinder gives you more and doesn't let you shoulder all the job. If the characters return to Grace, you may follow this adventure up with Troubles in Grace, which is a collection of adventures that will lead the PCs from level 2 to level 5, I believe, and Bastion of Blasphemies is an adventure path set in the same region, which is Ostolav, one of my favorite by the way, and conveniently starts at level 5, so you can effectively play this one Unlit Star, then you play Troubles in Grace, and then you play Bastion of Blasphemies if you want a huge adventure. You're left with combining and tying them up together, but this is something you can do. And this is yet another reason why I believe that it was very important to make this adventure viable not only to new players and new GMs, but also to more experienced players and GMs, even to players who are not new to Pathfinder and knew it a bit, or players who are starting with Pathfinder but know other TTRPGs, because this might be the start of something new, of something big, and this may be appealing for any players who misses the old times where adventure paths were very long with 6 adventures and want to connect all these adventures together like they did with the Troubles in Notari and the previous starter set and then the Abomination Vault adventure path. So this is what I think about this adventure. Okay, so welcome back. I think we took a proper look of how this adventure works, on what I would improve, on what I think are its best spots, its weakest spots, and so on. Now, let me just say that we should remember that this is an introductory adventure, so most of the things I did and underlined are solved actually in Pathfinder's adventure design in Adventure Path. But I still think that it's interesting to see how this game presents itself to its prospective new players. I think that Pathfinder as a game may have benefited from a bolder approach to the writing of this adventure and its design. But I have to say that I still like this adventure. It has a lot of strong points, and all in all things considered, I deem it a good introductory set. I would have liked to see more the spirits of Pathfinder, I would have liked to see more of what the system can offer, and instead what I got is a system that sometimes it seems to me like it's almost ashamed of its complexity and tries to hide it, where I think that is its strongest selling point, and that is also the strongest feature when compared to other games. Let me know in the comments down below what you think about my analysis, if you agree with me, if you disagree, if there are any other things that you would have changed about this adventure, if you have played it, what are your feedback about it, because I believe that Paizo as a group has always been very respondent to feedback and very attentive to what the people that play their game actually say about it. So everything I think is precious, every feedback is good and is an opportunity for them to improve and give us what we really want. With that said, I thank you for having the patience to bear with me for such a long time. I thank my Patreons that allow me to do this and to explore new languages, new games, and not focus only on what's trending. They allow me to make this channel self-sustainable, so my huge thanks to them. If you are new to the channel, I hope that you enjoyed this kind of in-depth analysis, and I will see you in the next videos.